Well, hello there, and welcome to day 113 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today, quite unexpectedly, I am doing Iron Man 3. So, a bit of behind the scenes, sort of pulling the curtain back. I do sometimes have a plan for this show and a bit of a schedule and an idea of what kind of films I want to be covering. And of course, the last couple of weeks I've been doing themes, the horror theme, or a lot more BAFTA and Oscar-centric new releases, obviously in preparation for the awards. And I do try to balance out my releases throughout the week, so that it's a little bit representative of different things. Traditionally, I only tend to do one Marvel film a week at most. However, originally scheduled for today was the about-to-be-released, new, exciting HBO Max for the US, Amazon Prime, theoretically, for everywhere else, Mortal Kombat. Didn't get released in the UK. This has come as quite a shock to a lot of people, especially UK citizens who were expecting the film, and what makes it more complicated is the fact that not only was the film not released, but we had no prior warning it wasn't going to be released. And frankly, Warner Brothers has been a bit coy about the release of the film. They'd already pushed it back, and they had said in their marketing it was only being released to the US. But there was a strange sort of understanding that because originally it was going to be simulcast, and it's only since the pushback that now it's only being released to the US, and there is no indication of when it's coming here, with the speculation being cinemas, maybe? Who knows? So very quickly today I had to scramble to decide what film I was going to do, and frankly, this has all been an exercise in disappointment. And so I thought, well, as it's an extra one on the list, why not do the cinematic exercise in disappointment, the narrative exercise in disappointment in Iron Man 3. So, this phase of the MCU was always going to be a bit tough, because this was the weird aftermath after having such a huge, phenomenal success with the Avengers, and pulling off something that had never been achieved in that way before. And frankly, I think Marvel at this point no longer Paramount. It was Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't think they quite knew how to proceed and how they were going to evolve the MCU after what had come before. And so I suppose Iron Man 3 was sort of the first step in the new face of Marvel. And unfortunately, that means that in the next couple of films, so of course we have Iron Man 3, Thor 2, we then do have Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy, and then Avengers Age of Ultron. And I think all of that really represents the constant experimentation and Marvel trying different things and taking risks. And frankly, that's all wonderful. They should have been taking risks and trying different things. However, unfortunately, it means on a film-by-film basis, we end up with wildly misjudged decision-making. And frankly, Iron Man 3 is almost the exemplar of that. Because, I mean, watching this film back now, and I've only seen this since I originally saw it in the cinema in 2013. Watching this back, I almost wanted to not do a video like these traditional ones and go away and write like a proper, written, considered, edited review where it actually breaks down the anatomy of this film, because Shane Black is a phenomenal director for his particular kind of films, which are these action style, of course, Lethal Weapons and the gangster films, and he seems to really, you know, be a master in that field. However, I'm tempted to make a very blanket statement, but perhaps it's being a bit disingenuous, but I don't think Shane Black does genre very well. Because between Iron Man 3 and 2018's Predator, or The Predator, sorry, he falls into almost the same issues. And it might not be an issue of doing superhero films or science fiction. It might be the fact that he's doing these big franchise movies and has to contend with studios whilst trying to do his normal hallmarks. But the two films are weirdly similar in their issues. And again, they use very similar. He uses very similar devices in it, and it'd be interesting to see whether that's the same for many of his other films. Primarily, the two obvious ones are his weird obsession with Christmas and his use of always having like a child be a prominent character for you that has some relationship to your lead. And so in the case of Iron Man 3, we have Harley, who becomes this boy who Iron Man befriends when he's lost everything, and he's sort of the starting point from which Tony can rebuild his world, I suppose. And the funny thing about it is those aren't the issues. Actually, I didn't hate Harley. I actually found Robert Downey Jr. really carries off a nice dynamic, and there's something quite particularly sharp between his banter and Harley and their dynamic that contends with the same relationships he has with Gwyneth Paltrow, Don Cheadle, Jon Favreau. It's impressive how good a chemistry Robert Downey Jr. manages to create with this young actor. And the Christmas thing is weird and a little bit annoying, but it's not a major problem with the film. So I'm going to talk about this pretty comprehensively, as in total spoilers, because I'm going to immediately hit some of the major prominent aspects of this, and frankly, it's Iron Man 3. Like, either you've seen it or you haven't, and it's fine. It's, you know, but yeah, spoilers ahead. So, the biggest issue with Iron Man 3, of course, is the Mandarin, Trevor Slattery, Aldrich Killian of it. And frankly, yeah, that's still unforgivable. It's still... I wish there was a way that you could re-examine this and go, well, isn't it interesting that he manages to subvert our expectations? But on the one hand, you have the problem that the Mandarin is a respected character in Marvel Comics, and he does have a troubling history. I mean, just to quickly summarise, the Mandarin was a attempt for Marvel to do their own version of Fu Manchu because they lost the rights to Fu Manchu. And unfortunately, by creating the Mandarin, they created an incredibly troubling, poorly aged Asian stereotype that's almost as bad as the cartoons of the 1940s depiction of Japanese people. And so, you know, he has the long fingers and ties into sorcery and the crazy moustache beard and the long hair, and it's very stereotypical. And the comics obviously have grown past that, and they've had to try and find ways to get around it, and in other media they've tried to find ways to get around it. So, of course, they gave him green skin to make him more alien, but then, because they didn't change from anything else, it still feels just that tad majorly racist. And so when it came to the cinematic universe, and they showed us this version of the Mandarin played by Ben Kingsley, and you're not entirely sure what his nationality is, it's not stated, but he has this really eloquent way of speaking, but also threatening, And of course, the Ten Rings had been set up in Iron Man 1, and so you had this sense of lore, and you think, oh wow, they're really going to revitalise and bring a different interpretation of the Mandarin character. And they do, for the first half. And frankly, that's representative of the whole issue, which is the first half is great. The stuff about Tony Stark's post-traumatic stress disorder, his obsessive personality latching onto suit building being the outlet by which he's trying to cope with the post-traumatic stress, the escalation of terrorism by the Mandarin, and this, you know, the sort of uncomfortable environment that's being created possibly because of New York and the alien invasion, and the fact that the world doesn't know how to cope, and so technology is advancing to try and cope, to try and deal with that. And of course that allows someone like Aldrich Killian to take advantage of it and create dangerous biotechnology. All of that's actually really interesting. And then you get to the twist point where we arrive at what turns out to be the Mandarin's base, which is just a Miami apartment, or sorry, house, condo type setup. And he turns out to be a drug-addicted actor who is given prostitutes and anything he wants. And it's offensive because, one, it turns what was a very serious, incredibly well-balanced narrative into a joke, into a punchline. Two, you take the character of the Mandarin, which, as I've said, has this long history, which is difficult and troubling, but he's still well respected in the comics, and he is the fundamental Iron Man villain. And you turn him into a punchline. And then the whole scene becomes this joke about, you know, this half-drunk, half out of it because of the drugs he's on, caricature who has this joke about pushing the two prostitutes who are with him into the bathroom which he's just used, and how gross it is in there. And it's disrespectful to, like, people who were invested in the story they thought they'd come to see. And it isn't subverting, it's caricature, it's parody, pistache. You know, and it's a shame because, like I say, it just undermines everything that came before, that really solid, serious first half. That's not serious because you still have the Tony Stark banter, but it's, you know, it takes the world seriously. And so that's a huge misstep. And then they try to sort of circumvent that by having Aldrich Killian sort of try and be, so I've been the Mandarin the whole time, you know, he's powered himself with Extremis, and of course at one point he's all burnt up, so he looks monstrous, proclaiming that he's the Mandarin. But frankly, Aldrich Killian he's not a weak character, but he's a very troublingly written character. He's the kind of character you think, oh, you didn't quite know how to seed this villain. And the thing which I've noticed from this watch is that Guy Pearce really gives it a great performance. Actually, I think there's something about what Guy Pearce where he plays understated and yet dangerous all in one swoop. There's something about the sort of understated, almost lack of confidence performance he gives, where every line is just that little bit flat or off. And so when he makes, like, what you would, you know, a traditional MCU joke or sort of winky sort of statement, because there's something weird about the villain, it comes off differently. It comes off a bit like sinister in a way that hadn't been seen before. But the problem is, I mean, if you go back to the beginning, the prologue is... I hate the prologue. I think it's a really false start to the film. Because it tries to set up Guy Pearce, Aldrich Killian, it tries to set up Rebecca Hall's character, Maya, and do this big sort of voiceover thing about, oh, this is where my demons were created. And frankly, it's flat, it's unnecessary, and it shows us things we didn't need to see. And it does that thing that comic book films have a really bad habit of doing, which is You know, it's your Cheetah from Wonder Woman 1984. It's your Edward Nygma from Batman Forever. It's your Selena Kyle from Batman Returns. It's your Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2, where it's, oh, he's this crazed, over the top, well, you know, brilliant and yet misunderstood genius that everyone slightly undermines and disrespects, and you know, and initially we're given that character, and it's annoying. It's a really annoying crutch that seems to be used countlessly. As I say, most recently in Wonder Woman 1984, which is done better, but still, it's such a poor archetype. And then it sets up some minor plot thing. The only thing about the prologue that I like is the fact that obviously we get the scene with Yinsen that is a callback to Iron Man 1. But frankly, the rest of it could be chucked away. It's just all nonsense. And so you have the character of Aldrich Killian, who then gets reintroduced, and he's smart and sharp, and yet, like I said, there's something weird and off and slightly troubling about him. And then, of course, it leads to the revelation that he's the Mandarin, and then he's more monstrous. But I don't know. It's a poor arc, and considering this was envisioned as the final Iron Man story, well, the final Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man story, and this is the last of the trilogy, it just doesn't tie together very well, and it tries to sort of internally create this long-standing relationship that didn't exist before. I mean, and then you also have Rebecca Hall, like I say, Maya. That character, frankly, I don't know what their plan was to do with her, because they introduce, you know, she's part of that prologue. She has this really strange relationship with the characters when she gets reintroduced, where she's like all conflicted and, oh, I'm the scientist who loves the science, but I got caught up with the villainy and the terrorism. And then she gets shot, and it's like, oh, okay, so what was the point of this character? What was her arc? I don't get that character. That character is possibly worse than Aldrich Killian, because at least I understood what they're going for with him. I don't get what her function was. So you've got all of these elements going on, and frankly, after the Trevor Slattery revelation and it gets back to the plot, the film's actually really good again. I mean, the stuff with the aeroplane and the fact that that skydive was real, it's very cool. That's a very cool action sequence and really well done. And then the final climax, where you have the extremist warriors versus Tony and Rhodes, and the ways they have to get around the fact that the suits aren't working, or they're having issues with it, and they have to rescue the President and Pepper. It's all actually a really well... And again, that shows that Shane Black can do these great action set pieces. I'd say it might be the best climax of the 3 Iron Man films. But again, like I say, in terms of the anatomy of it, there are so many things that are just haven't worked, that by the time you get to the climax, it's a bit like, oh, is it too little too late? Have you already done... There's already so many things in this that I don't like, that this really cool final set piece just doesn't do it for me. Hard to say. And then, of course, you have the epilogue with the extremists. And then again, this is another problem that Marvel were having, because they were trying things. But this was one of those ones where it's like, the politics behind this was a really bad call, which is, in the version that we watched, the American version, as it were, of course, inexplicably, after fixing Extremis, almost off-screen, Tony then also fixes his heart. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that was your main character feature. And then it ends, and it's like, oh, well, I am Iron Man, but I'm fixed. I'm giving up the suits. This is who I am. And it's really, really rushed and weirdly paced, and it's like, oh, okay. Turns out, as we then discovered a little later on, or simultaneously, the reason that's the way that is because for the Chinese market, they created an entire subplot with a character who's in the Chinese language, who's the surgeon who does the procedure that fixes Tony's heart. And that's not good. That's not good. That's not something we needed. that undermines the narrative that there is an entire arc that is, you know, available to some audiences but not to others. And frankly, it was pandering. It was pandering to a growing Chinese market, and it was just, again, it's a sign of disrespect to your audience that you would do that. And like I say, what I think I've come to the conclusion is that this, very little, if none of this, is Shane Black's fault. I don't know if it's his choice to do the Mandarin the way he did. That, and the Trevor Slattery comedy twist, that I didn't like. You know, maybe that is. The stuff with the Chinese market and the fixing everything was probably an MCU decision. And I get that they were trying things, but this was a real misstep. I mean, there was the question of whether this was the last... I mean, at the time, it was believed that Robert Downey Jr.'s contract was coming to an end. He showed little interest in returning, so this was going to be the end of the Iron Man arc of the MCU. And then it didn't. And then he came back, and he was in 4 more films, between the 3 Avengers films and Spider-Man. And so that sort of big, epic epilogue, where it's like, I am Iron Man, but I'm moving on, frankly, it's weak because it doesn't really mean anything. So yeah, so it's such a confused narrative because there's so much good in it, and yet there are so many missteps, and it's a shame because it is a very watchable film. If you can get over the Trevor Slattery scene, if don't hate the stuff with Harley, which actually, like I said, I didn't hate as much, and the other subplots that I don't like. You know, you do have some really good stuff. The explosion that puts Happy in the hospital, the blowing up of Tony's home, you know, the fact that he loses everything before he can start again. It's a really well placed, you know, climactic narrative for the Tony Stark Iron Man character. It's just, I don't know, there's just so much crap alongside of it. But yeah, this wasn't half as unwatchable as I remembered, which is nice. I still wonder about Shane Black, and I am tempted to push some Shane Black stuff onto my list because, frankly, I actually haven't seen that many of his films outside of the ones I have pointed out that I dislike. And this one, I think I can sort of say, well, it's not his fault. It's just it was a complex time. The Predator, I'm still I'm laying that with him. But I would like to go back and watch some of his other stuff and try and get a better understanding of his style and what he was going for. But yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting point in the MCU, and of course, next is Thor 2, and we'll see my thoughts on that. Which actually, weirdly, I quite liked the first time, but after subsequent watches is when it started to wear on me. But we'll see. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell to get notifications of new videos. There are well more than 100 videos now, so please do check out some of the older ones. Of course, I now have the MCU playlist that starts from Iron Man 1 all the way up to now, and will continue as I go through the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As I said, Mortal Kombat was supposed to be today. I don't know when it's coming. I don't know if I'm going to have to wait to see it in the cinema. Who knows? But I shall keep an eye on that situation. Thank you for joining me. Oh, if you would like, please do follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting stuff, including movie-related content and, of course, links to new uploads. Thank you for joining me. Take care.